Okay, guys, good morning. I'm so glad to see so many people that have popped on. I know we're all busy, so I'm going to try to keep this at an hour or less. But if you do not know me, I'm Sarah Romsberg. I'm out of the Mooresville office, and I like to teach. And so I'm glad that everyone has come to learn some things today. Today, we're going to talk about the contract to close period. So I like to think of the contract to close period as the time where we really earn our commission as realtors on both the listing side and the buyer's agent side. I think that's really the time that we can shine and we can show up for our clients. Sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's not. So we're just going to break through the different parts of being under contract and getting to the closing table and some things. Hopefully, I can share some tips and strategies to make that more streamlined for you and make it easier to navigate that, again, both on the listing and the buyer side. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I've got a little PowerPoint. And as always, if you have any questions or concerns or comments, I would love to hear them. You can either type in the chat box or you could just interrupt. Feel free just to interrupt and comment with anything that you have to share. All right. In our class today, like I said, we're going to break through all of the issues that could come up in contract to close, some of the tips and strategies that I have to make it a streamlined process. And, hopefully we can mitigate issues that could come up and do come up, so then when those things do happen, we know what to do, what to say, how to move forward, and how to keep a transaction calm. So to begin with, I've shown this picture before in other classes I've taught, but in 2022 our market looks a lot like this. As realtors, we have listing agents who are cool, calm, and collected, and we have buyers agents that look like they have been through it. So I like this picture because I'm sure you have been both sides of this. I know I have been. Buyers agents are really working hard. And when I started this class, I said the contract to close period is really when you earn your commission. That's not necessarily true for buyers agents because sometimes you have shown clients, 10, 20, 30, 40 houses before you get under contract. So if that's the case, you feel like you've earned your commission tenfold by the time you do go under contract. But, listing agents have it hard sometimes too. Most of the time their life looks pretty glamorous, but there are issues that come up. I've got some stories to tell in this class. I'm at the tail end of a transaction right now where I am the listing agent, and um, I look like the second picture at the end of this transaction. So, it's not all rainbows and daisies for listing agents either, but there are different issues. The main thing is you have to work together with the other side to alleviate lots of these issues. So before we get started on this page, I want you to look at the bottom of the screen, and you can see I always have like a little sentence. And my sentence for this presentation is you set the tone in the contract to close process. So as whatever agent you are, if you're the listing agent or you're the buyer's agent, you have to remember that you set the tone. Clear communication is key. You set the tone with your clients, whether it be sellers or buyers, and you also set the tone with the other agent. So I like to think of this on a personal level too. I don't know how many of you guys have children or are married, but if the mom in the house is in an upset mood and frazzled, everybody's in an upset mood and frazzled, or at least that is in my house. So I have to remember too, at home, I set the mood for my house. If I am calm, cool, collected, everybody else will be also. There is no truer statement when it comes to real estate than if you are calm, cool, and collected, everybody will feed off that energy. If you are frazzled and you are confrontational and you are look for issues, then other people will also. So again, you're going to see that sentence at the bottom of each one of these slides. So the first page, we're going to talk about as a buyer's agent, when we are under contract, what are our responsibilities? Very simply, the things that you need to do, and again, they're listed on this page. You need to communicate with the lender. If you're the buyer's agent, hopefully you have a relationship with the lender already. You need to make sure that you get the contract to the lender ASAP. There are so many things that they are responsible for in the under contract period. And so getting that executed contract to the lender is super important and one of the first things you need to do. You also need to get a closing attorney set up. A lot of us, especially since Lantern does not hold escrow money, a lot of us will have the closing attorney set up in the contract, which is great, but you also need to get them a copy of that executed contract and deliver money. If you are the buyer's agents, to the closing attorney, to the listing agent for the due diligence, those are things that also need to happen ASAP. You need to make sure you're communicating with all people in the party. So, let the listing agent know ASAP what time closing is scheduled for. Let the your buyers know ASAP what time you've set up closing for. Just communicate. It's very easy to communicate, and that's something that, again, just sets the tone for the transaction. So setting up inspections is also something we need to do as soon as possible in this market. We see due diligence periods that are less and less. Every time I see an offer, I feel like the due diligence period is a shorter amount of time. So when you're dealing with a short due diligence period, you need to set those inspections up ASAP. Inspectors, sometimes they're super busy, sometimes they're not, but it takes a little bit to get everything done, especially if you have a house with a well and a septic and a pool, and you need a survey and you need all the things. You need to get that set up ASAP. As a buyer's agent, you are the one who initiates asking for repairs. You're the one who is going to draft that DDRA document and ask for repairs after the inspection reports have come in. You also, as a buyer's agent, have to stay on top of the lender to make sure that the appraisal has been ordered, to make sure that your clients, the buyers, are turning in everything on time. Lenders sometimes, or we take advantage of the fact that lenders are the one who initiate all of that. But I think it's our responsibility to touch base with the lender, touch base with our clients to make sure that all of those things are taking place. Also, if you are not working with a lender that communicates with you, you need to find a new lender, because the power of communication and all of this is so important. But the lenders, and there's so many, who send you an email when the appraisal's ordered. They send you an email when, your buyers have turned in all their things. Like, that is so important. And that kind of takes away the fact for you to have to check in with them. So again, if you are not working with a lender who communicates with you as a buyer's agent, and even communicates to the listing agent, there are so many lenders that do. So, I would suggest you get with a lender who does. And then also, you want to make sure your buyers are aware of the things that they should not do while under contract. This is simple to us because we live in this world where, we know what we can and cannot do and what buyers can and cannot do, but buyers don't. Most of the time, the lenders will send them an email that says, don't open up new credit, don't, buy a car, don't close credit. Don't go buy furniture. Don't go and, put down a 10,000 deposit on having your house painted. You really just kind of have to lock up and not do anything when you're in the under contract period. Obviously don't change jobs, even if it's the same job where you're making the exact same salary, doing the exact same thing. You can't do those things when you're under contract. So I think it's our job as an agent to kind of actually say those things and not just send it in an email. And then again, as a buyer's agent, you're going to want to reach out to the listing agent and get the utility information, and send that over to your buyer a couple weeks before closing, and communicate that, it's their responsibility to make sure the utilities are set up for closing and beyond. So they, don't close on the house and then don't have power or water. You want to give them that utility information. So, as a buyer's agent, we have a lot of responsibilities. A buyer's agent kind of takes the lead in the under contract period of setting things up. You are the one who is scheduling a lot of things. You are the one who is just kind of making sure that everything is done. And in the under contract period, it kind of goes in up and down like a roller coaster. So it's stressful when we are trying to get a contract on the table, and we work really hard, we negotiate, we get a contract on the table. Then we calm down for a little bit, inspections are taking place, and then it ramps back up when we're asking for repairs and negotiating, things with the listing agent and the seller. And then usually it ramps back down again. And then, right before closing, things can happen. There can be lots of bad things that happen in the few days before closing. So it's very up and down. And in this market, especially, that happens in a short time period. So as a buyer's agent, you just have to be on top of it. You have to have a list. You have to know what you are doing, and not let any of these steps slip up on you. You don't want it to be, the day before due diligence period is over and realize you never told your buyers that, they should maybe get well and septic inspection if the house has a well and septic. You've waited too long at that point to move forward. So it's super important to be on top of things when you're the buyer's agent. All right, listing agent. Listing agents get to relax a little bit in the under contract period for the most part. So, a listing agent works really, really hard to get a house listed, to get all the pictures, get the house measured, market the house, do the MLS listing. And then once the offers start coming in, we have to get with our sellers and kind of do pros and cons with each offer. But then once we're under contract, a listing agent generally, doesn't have to work as hard. And I say generally because, like I just mentioned, I am living the exact opposite of that right now. But for the most part, the buyer's agent is the one who handles most of the stuff. As a listing agent, we have some things that we do have to do and are responsible for. So we negotiate repairs that are asked for after the inspection. This is my least favorite thing in life to do ever, is to negotiate repairs with the seller when I'm the listing agent, because the seller obviously is offended that anything is the matter with their house. They are offended that the buyer has asked for anything, and they can at this point take things like a personal attack. So again, at the bottom, that little sentence, you set the tone for the process, and clear communication is key. This is super important to stay calm, to stay respectful, and, not blow up situations, but try to diffuse situations. And so when we negotiate repairs with our sellers, we kind of have to, walk a thin line of, we understand that the buyer's asking for some legitimate things, but we also understand that the seller has lived in this house and loved this house and probably has no idea that anything is the matter with it. So that's a thin line that we have to walk. We also have to, I think this is honestly the most important thing a listing agent can do. We have to send over to the appraiser the comps we use to price the house, the added value that may exist that they might not be able to see just looking at the house on paper or in person. I think it's important to let an appraiser know. An appraiser can see all these things, but I also think it's important to let an appraiser know we were on the market for 2 days and we had 12 offers. We went under contract after only being 2 days on the market. Anything I can tell the appraiser to justify value in a house, I'm going to do. I will warn you that 90% of the time I get no response when I send those facts over to an appraiser. I usually do it in email, and 90% of the time I get no email response. So I don't know that appraisers like getting those emails, but as a listing agent, my job is to protect my sellers and work for them. And so, you know, if there is an appraisal issue that comes back and the house does not appraise, I don't want to be sitting there and say, well, you know, I didn't do everything I could do to make sure the appraiser saw the value that I saw. So when I have that email and I've sent everything over, you know, I can say that, like, I sent everything over. I sent the comps over. I sent the added value pieces over. And most of the time appraisals are not an issue for me. So that I think is super important as a listing agent for us to all do. And we can see the appraiser, like in showing time, they're going to schedule the appraisal through showing time. So you can click on the little info and see who, see who the appraiser is. And that's how I get their information to send over all of that info. We are going to want to get utility information from our sellers and get it to the buyer's agent. I like to do this as part of going, like, before I even list the house. I think we have a document in .loop where you can ask the seller for all their utility information. And this is good for us just to cover your butts part too, because, you know, then we know to put if it's gas or if it's all electric, or, you know, if it's sewer or all those things, because the seller has filled out the utility info before I even list the house. So that's something I go ahead and send over to the buyer's agent, usually as soon as we go under contract, because I have it ahead of time. We also are going to make sure that the seller info sheet from the attorney gets filled out ASAP. The closing attorney will usually email that out to you, the agent, and they will have you forward that on to your seller. That's something that needs to be done as soon as possible. The closing attorney is the one who gets the mortgage payoff and, you know, all of the things done, the tax forms, the title work. And so they need that form from the sellers as soon as possible. I know as a seller and a buyer, they have so much paperwork that is coming into them and they're expected to click and sign and do, but the attorney seller info sheet is something that you really need to stay on top of for your sellers. And then lastly, is another one of those things that you might not think of, but is super important. And I have had this bite me in the butt before. As a listing agent, you need to convey to your sellers expectations on how the house should look at closing. So sometimes sellers just think they can pack up their stuff, leave trash, leave the yard a mess, you know, just not clean it all. Like, that's not the case. I have had sellers that left, they got everything out and they left, and there was a pile of trash in their front yard, like by the road, taller than I am. And it was the day of closing, and I went by the house to get my sign and lockbox, and I saw this mountain of trash. And the sellers just thought that maybe the city would come get it. Maybe the buyers would not care, but, you know, I called them right away and said, you have to come get this. You can't leave. We cannot close and have, you know, the house look like this. Like, would you, if you were a buyer and you rolled up to your brand new house and saw a mountain of trash by the road, how would that make you feel? And so sellers sometimes get in their own lane and they don't think about that. They think, you know, I'm getting out, like, it doesn't matter what the house looks like, but that's not the case. The sellers need to leave the house clean, free of trash. They don't need to leave stuff in the garage. They don't need to leave stuff in the crawl space. They don't need to leave nasty stuff in the refrigerator. Like, I've seen all this stuff before, and that's a conversation that you really need to have with your sellers. You need to let them know how their house should look when they close. Just to prevent any issues. Again, we want to make sure everyone's happy when we leave a transaction, and that's a way that we can make sure everybody ends a transaction happy. So on here, I've got that your biggest role is ensuring that your sellers know that you have their back. There are going to be issues that come up in the under contract period sometimes, where sellers are, you know, they feel like if there are inspection issues or appraisal issues, you know, they're going to feel kind of beaten up on. And when it comes to how much money they're going to walk away with, that's very personal to people. And so you just need to make sure your sellers know you have their back. You're their agent. Your number one job is to make sure this house closes and gets them the most money possible in their pocket. But you also need to, you know, try to show the other side of that sometimes. And sometimes it does take saying to a seller, you know, put yourself in the buyer's shoes. And if you were buying this house, you know, and these issues came up, that would be something that's important to you, or take them back to when they bought the house. So, you know, it's really working with a seller sometimes can be, I feel like it's like a hostage negotiation sometimes. Like you feel like the bomb squad's coming in and you have to talk. You can't say the wrong things. You know, you have to be calm, and you have to make sure you are saying things that are important to them and that they can take in and process. But like I said at the bottom of every page, you set that tone. So if you have set a tone in the transaction of, oh my gosh, the buyer's agent is so annoying. The buyer is so annoying. They want to see this house again. They want to have their family come see it. Like, why is he just now sending me this document so late? If that's the way you're talking to your seller, that's the way they're going to look at the other side of the transaction. If you talk to your seller like, hey, the buyer's agent wanted to make another showing request because the buyers are so excited to have their family see the house, their family's in town, you know, is that okay? Or, you know, the buyer's agent apologized for getting this document with the request in so late. The buyers wanted to make sure they were only asking for things that are important to them. Like, it's all how you phrase things. And so as a listing agent, we have to make sure we're phrasing things in a way that is going to serve everyone in the transaction. And if honestly, that if I could just say one thing in this class, that is that. Just the way you talk and the way you communicate determines how successful a transaction will be. Okay, does anyone have any comments, questions, concerns before we keep going? Let me go to the chat box and just see if anybody has said anything. No, I don't see anything in the chat box. Do you? Am I missing anything? Okay. All right, let me take a sip of water. So now let's get to the fun part, which is potential issues and deal breakers. So I kind of just broke down what everybody's responsible for, but this is, you know, this is the fun part of under contract period. When we think about potential issues or deal breakers in an under contract period, and there are many, many, many of those things. In this market, you know, honestly, buyers back out of deals less than they did a few years ago, just because there's not a lot to choose from. So a buyer feels very lucky and fortunate if they are under contract on a house and can sometimes overlook things that 3 or 4 years ago they would not have overlooked. But again, who knows how long things are going to be like this. And so it's important to know how to move on from lots of different issues. So the most important thing that happened, or not the most important, but the most common thing that I feel like happens as an issue is the loan status changes for the buyers. So a buyer that was qualified is suddenly not qualified anymore. And honestly, there's not a lot we can do about that. As a buyer's agent, like I said, we can make sure our buyers know not to open up credit, change jobs, all of those things. But in the many, many lenders that exist in the world, some lenders will very quickly issue a pre-approval or pre-qualification document, but they have not dug deep to actually do the work to see if they are actually pre-qualified or they are actually pre-approved. So, you know, as a listing agent too, it's always important to make sure when a buyer submits an offer that we know the lender. We know that this lender is not just one of the lenders who issues blank pre-approval statements. As a listing agent before, I have called the lenders a few times if it's a lender I've never heard of, just to kind of talk through, you know, what that pre-approval looks like. But buyer loan status changes is probably the most common deal breaker that can happen. I've had that happen personally on the house that I was selling. Probably like 4 days before closing, the buyer's loan fell apart. And again, this was my personal house that I was selling. And luckily, a lender that I knew and worked with often swooped in and saved the deal for the buyers. But stressful. Nobody wants that to happen, buyers or sellers. Appraisal issues is also another big one that pops up. My nightmare transaction I'm in right now had a big appraisal issue. And that is stressful. When the house does not appraise for your under contract price, it creates a lot of stress for both the buyer and the seller. I know a lot of buyers will offer to pay the difference in this market, but not all buyers do. If I was a buyer, I don't know that I would offer that. Like, that's a big ask to offer to pay out of pocket over what the house is valued at. And so as a seller, you're faced with either lowering the price or coming up with a compromise or having the buyer back away from the deal, but then, you risk putting it on the market again. So appraisal issues can be very, very stressful on both sides of the transaction. I think if you do have appraisal issues, it's very important to stick to the facts when it comes to dealing with your seller. Say, here are our options. We can come down, we can meet in the middle, we can have the buyers walk away. But if that happens and we have to put the house back on the market, people are going to want to know why it's back on the market. And if it's appraisal issues, then we need to communicate that. And who's to say it's not going to appraise low the second time we get it under contract? So they're always going to ask you, what would you do? What do you think I should do? I never answer those questions ever, ever, ever. I always stick to the facts and say, here's what, here are our choices. And sometimes it is painful. Right now, the transaction I'm dealing with is very painful for my sellers, but they understand that, we were probably under contract higher than we should have been in the first place, and they don't want to put it back on the market, and it is what it is. So sometimes it can be a very stressful situation. Inspection issues can also be high stress, and they can, there can be lots of big deals that come from inspections. If you're selling a house that has a crawl space, you can have moisture issues. You can have all these things like basements and crawl spaces make me have more panic attacks in the under contract period than any other type of house. So you just need to make sure, again, you're sticking to the facts of what could happen. We can fix these things. We can offer a credit. We can do nothing. And if we do nothing, the buyer could walk away. They could be okay with it, but just stick to the facts and let the sellers decide what's the most important thing for them. Again, on the buyer side, they're going to see the inspection report and they're going to see 75 pages of everything that's wrong with the house. Make sure you communicate with your buyers. A house or a home inspector's job is to find every little thing that is wrong with that house. Does that mean that every little thing in that home inspection is super important and needs to be fixed? Probably not, but you can't make that decision up for them. So if there is something that is super important to the buyer, and if that thing is not addressed or credited properly, you need to make sure, you let them know. Your choices are, you can ask for these things to be done. And if the seller doesn't do it, you can either be okay with it or you can walk away. So just kind of always state the facts of what could and could not happen. Title issues, that's a big one. I personally had a deal probably 6 or 7 years ago where I listed a house for a lady. She was the only one on the deed. She bought the house by herself. Then she got married, apparently. And then she was not married anymore by the time she wanted me to sell her house. And so I pulled the deed. It was just her name. I met with her. I said, "Are you married?" She said, "No." Okay, so we list the house. Great, go under contract. She was married. She was not divorced in the state of North Carolina. So then when we were about 2 weeks away from closing, the attorney found out that she actually was still legally married. And you know what that means. Her husband, ex-husband, whatever he was, had to sign the closing documents. Ex-husband was not going to sign the closing documents. They ended things not on the best of terms, and he did not sign them. And was not going to sign them. And the buyer, again, I'm the listing agent. So the buyer's agent, the buyer was actually an attorney, which is not a good situation to be in, when this issue comes up. So the attorney slash client actually sued my seller before we got to the point where things happened. The ex-husband finally agreed to sign to the tune of having a lot of money in his pocket, but it worked itself out. But that's an example of a title issue that even, you know, as a listing agent, I thought I did everything correctly. I'm sure I probably didn't, but you know, she was the only one on the deed. I point blank asked her, "Are you married?" She said no. So at that point, it's kind of like, okay, well, I don't know what I could have done differently, but I wish looking back, I did do something differently, obviously. But that's an example of a title issue that could come up, and your closing attorney is going to be the one who finds those things. Lender delays. This one is super common now because appraisers are just really busy. And so sometimes an appraisal does not come back on time, and that can create a delay of when they said you could close versus when you actually can close. As a buyer's agent, you always want to ask the lender the time frame they need to get something closed. So a buyer's agent should never just write an offer that says we can close in 21 days unless you have confirmed with that lender that you can close in 21 days. It's like never ever write a contract until you've talked with the lender, you know, to confirm they can close that, especially if you have a short time frame. Survey disputes is another one that doesn't pop up often, but when it does, it is bad news. I had a listing one time where they had a shop, like a detached shop, and they got everything permitted. Again, I'm the listing agent. I asked them, did you get all this stuff permitted? Yes, absolutely. It's permitted, blah, blah, blah. Well, they actually built another room off the shop after everything was permitted and approved and zoned properly. And that extra room was in the setbacks. So when the buyer had their survey done, it was determined that the extra little bump out room was in the 20-foot setback area. The county made them remove that room. They did not care that the sellers had already built. It was a 100 square feet room. The county said, you know, that's your fault. And the buyers would not close until that had been done, which I fully understand. So that is an example of a survey issue that could pop up. You always want to make sure things are, you know, done properly, and you need to communicate that to your seller. Say, if I'm going to list your house and you have done something, you know, you just built this rogue building without having it permitted and zoned and set back and all those things, you know, this is going to come up on a survey. So that's a thing that sellers sometimes don't think about, especially if they have a larger property where they feel like they can do whatever they want. Like, no, you don't have an HOA to stop you, but you still have the confines of the county and, you know, setback requirements and things like that. So we want to make sure we're talking to our sellers, especially about that. And then this one is kind of uncommon in this market, but if there's a home contingency of the buyer, that could be a deal breaker. So if you're under contract with someone who has to sell their house before they can buy and something falls through on the sale, well, then they can't buy your house. Again, that was much more common a few years ago than it is now, but that can, you know, as a listing agent, you want to make sure before your seller accepts an offer that is contingent on something, that you make sure they know that's a possibility. Even if your buyer does everything perfectly, if the buyer for their house, something falls through, then that's an issue for your transaction. Okay, does anybody have any questions or comments or concerns? Okay, and then when we are almost at the finish line, you know, it's like I said earlier, we go up and down and up and down. When we're almost at the finish line, we really, really, really want to make sure everybody's on the same page, if possible. There are periods where your sellers are going to be frustrated with the buyers, where you as one agent are probably going to be frustrated with the other agent. I think it's important for everyone to try to end a transaction on a positive note. I think it's important for you to end things with the closing attorney, with the lender on a positive note. You know, this is the last interaction that you're going to have with your client during this transaction. And if you want this to be a client you work with in the future, you don't want to end on a bad note. You don't want to end where everybody's upset with one another and, you know, we all feel that sometimes you never want to see someone again. You want to block their number from your cell phone and never talk to that person again. I'm at that point in this transaction I've been speaking of. Am I going to let my clients or the other agent know that? No, I'm not. I'm going to be nice, and I'm going to smile, and I'm going to be polite, and I'm going to end things, calm and respectfully, because my clients are going to remember how I treated them, how I treated the other side. This agent is going to remember how I treated him. And it just serves no purpose. It serves no purpose to be rude. It serves no purpose to be difficult. Like, we are all working towards the same goal, and that goal is to close a transaction. So if you're the buyer's agent, your goal is to get it closed. If you're the listing agent, your goal is to get it closed. And when that's your big picture, it's easier to kind of bite your tongue, or it's easier to let some things slide and just move on with your life. And that is so important for you to remember. You can live your life and your real estate life high stress, or you cannot. It doesn't change the outcome generally, but it does change how you feel about your career. Like, we all chose this career for a reason. And if you just live a high stress real estate life, you're probably not going to do this for very long. And so just, stay calm, stay cool. If it doesn't matter, it's not going to matter. This nightmare transaction I have closes tomorrow. A month from now, it's not going to matter. Like, I'm not going to remember how stressed I am right now. It's going to be closed. The buyers are going to be happy. The sellers are going to be fine. We're all going to move on. But, it's my job to make sure that everybody ends on a positive note, if possible. That's not always possible, but I'm going to do my part to make sure it's possible. So just remember that. And then lastly, I want to talk about something that could make your life potentially easier in the under contract period. I am too much of a control freak for this to really help me, but I wish I wasn't, because a transaction coordinator can be such a blessing to your business. If you know you're not good at something, like taking pictures of houses or measuring houses, you use a professional. I always use professional photographers. I always use a professional measurer to go out and do those things for a listing. If you are not good about paperwork and scheduling and emails and all of those things, use a professional. There are so many transaction coordinators out there who can swoop in and make sure all your forms are filled out, make sure every inspection is scheduled, make sure your closing is set up, make sure communication is taking place when inspection reports come in. Usually a transaction coordinator is not going to negotiate anything for you. So they're not going to negotiate repairs with your seller or buyer or with the other agent, but they will make sure you have the reports in front of you, make sure the DDRA is drafted. And again, every transaction coordinator is different. I know we have some at Lantern. Can you do that still? Never know.
Do it for one.
Okay. Melissa does it for one person, and she maybe would do it for others, maybe not. I don't know. But we have some people in this office who I know, would do that for other people if they are good at that. So don't be afraid to use a transaction coordinator if paperwork and emails and things is not something you're good at, or if it's something that you feel like is taking away time from other important things. We only have so much time in a day. So if I know that, I'm not good at these things and this is sucking energy out of me, then hire a transaction coordinator. It's very simple, and it's a resource that a lot of people use and a lot of people love, because it takes some of the kind of like mundane part of a transaction away from them, so they can focus on other parts of the transaction. Like I said, if you're like a control freak like I am, you're probably not going to want a transaction coordinator, because it's like, I don't know. One time I had somebody come in to clean my house. I cleaned the house cleaner than it had ever been in my life before the cleaner came over. And my husband came home and said, "What happened? Like, the cleaner's coming tomorrow." But it's just my personality where I can't do that for some reason. So a transaction coordinator is not for me. But if you're not like that, it could be for you, and that could make things a lot easier for your life. One last thing I forgot to put in the slide. I always send on both the buyers and the listing side, I always send a contract to close email as soon as we go under contract. And so I have just like over the years made kind of a draft for a buyer and made a draft for a seller. And as soon as we go under contract, I send them an email. And the title is "Congrats, you're under contract." And it just lists all the things that are going to happen during the under contract period, all the things they need to do. I also attach a copy of the actual executed contract for their records. So it just serves as a way for me to communicate with them in a way that they can go back and look at that document. If you want a copy of my contract to close email, I will gladly send it out to you. If you shoot me an email, I'll go back to the first page with my email address on it. If you send me an email, I will respond and attach a copy of my contract to close emails. But again, it's just something now I have it saved where I can copy and paste it, and I can very easily, you know, change dates, change names and all that stuff. But it takes 5 minutes to send out, and I think it's a great way for us to communicate with our clients and let them know what to expect. So does anybody have any questions or comments or concerns? Let me get out of the share stage. Okay, there we go. All right. No comments. I don't see anything in the chat box. So as always, again, my big takeaway from this class is just you set the tone, you stay calm, you create the level of, you know, enthusiasm you want to see from your clients. And I promise you, if you can remember those things, it will be easier for you in the future when you deal with stressful situations. You will have stressful situations. If you have not in the under contract period, you know, you haven't done this long enough, and I guarantee you will. It's just part of it. And when I said this is when you earn your money, I found that to be true. Like the under contract period can be very stressful, but it can also be the time where you prove to your clients why they pay you the big bucks like they think they do. And you know, this is a time where they remember how you showed up for them, and that's why they refer people to you. So when I get referrals, it's generally not because, you know, I got it under contract in one day. It's generally because I communicated clearly. I helped navigate everything for them. I was calm. I was professional. This under contract period is when you show your clients, you know, what you are, who you are as a realtor, and why you're the best. And so this is just a time when you can really make yourself shine and show up for your clients in the best way to work towards the same goal, which is to get the house closed. All right. So again, send me an email if you want a copy of my contract to close documents, and I will respond back with those. And thank you so much for coming. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And I just appreciate you all for coming to class today.
Thank you.
All right. I'll see everybody later.